3D printing with silk filaments. Today we're going to cover what makes this filament so awesome, go over some very important do's and don'ts, give you some essential settings in Cura that'll leave your prints looking flawless just like this one, and maybe a way you can put some extra cash in your pocket. It's coming up next, so come check it out. Hey, what's up everyone? Back at it again. It is DW Darkwing Dad bringing you today's video on printing with silk. So basically today's video is just going to cover, what silk printing is. It's a nice way just to let the machine do all of the work for you. The thing is with silk filament, when you kind of put the effort into the machine and fine-tuning your machine, there's very little you have to do. You can end up with an end piece just like this that looks absolutely flawless. There is just a little bit of fine-tuning that is needed. So what I'm going to do is just share some of my settings and a little bit of information with you about silk filaments that will hopefully help you achieve such results as some of these pieces you see in the back, or maybe even MF Doom right here. So what is silk filament and why is it so different than just regular PLA? What makes it different? Why does it look so good? It has a few different additives in it. A lot of them are actually made from starch. The biggest thing is they have elastomers in them. And basically what that is it is a polymer that has a little bit of flexibility and stretchability, if you will, hence the word elast. So that's the main additive that gives that silk that sheen, and it just how it lays so smooth. It is still a thermoplastic. When it's heated, it just reacts a little bit different than just some of the traditional PLAs and PETGs and things like that. It does need different settings, and it does need to be handled in different ways. So what I'm going to do is just kind of show you some of my settings in my Cura profile, explain some of those settings, show you some do's and don'ts that I've done in the past, and hopefully they'll help you guys get some awesome silk prints. Okay, so before we even start printing and slicing our file, let's get into a very important precautionary method to do before we start doing our printing with silk. Filament dehydrators are an absolute necessity and can separate a good print from a great print. See, because silk filament contains more starch than regular PLA, it's more likely to absorb and hold moisture. These filament dehydrators are really great, help getting moisture out and keep moisture from getting in, especially if you're doing a long print. So typically what I recommend doing is bake your filament before you start your print. We don't know how well it was packaged and how much moisture is actually in there. So give it about a 2 to 3 hour bake, somewhere between 45 and 50 degrees, and then put the filament in the dehydrator and let it run the whole time it's printing. Again, keeping it somewhere between 45 and 50 degrees will keep moisture from getting in, and it'll give you a great print at the end. So filament dehydrators, a very big thing that you want to have, not just for silk printing, but with 3D printing in general. Obviously PLA especially, it is very porous, silk printing even more. I kind of touched on that. It has higher amounts of starch in it, so it really will suck in that moisture and hold it. You get moisture in your filament, you're going to get all kinds of issues. You're going to get clogs, you're going to get banding. It's just going to wreck the whole print. So keeping that filament dry, very, very important. So I definitely recommend getting one of those filament dehydrators. Sunlu and Jo is what I use. They're basically the same company. You can usually get them for around 35, 40 bucks. So I definitely recommend picking up at least one of those. If you have multiple printers, get more, but definitely get those to help keep your filament dry and your prints looking good. Settings. Okay, so it's difficult because everyone's printers are different. Some people, they put a lot of money into aftermarket parts for their printer. Some people have them calibrated more accurately. Take this as a grain of salt. These are just some of my settings and some of my recommendations. So starting with layer height, it's no mystery. The finer the layer height, the smoother the print will be. We know we can cheat a little bit with silk filaments because it does have those elastomers in them. It does have that ability to stretch and kind of flex and just lay a little bit differently. So it really just depends on what your expectations are. So obviously on a print like this was a scorpion mask that some of you may or may not seen. But this was printed at a 0.16 layer height, and it looks absolutely ridiculous. It looks super smooth. There's no painting, there's no sanding. There's nothing that you really need to do. It just looks awesome like this. If you're doing this for financial gain and you're trying to get a little bit more pocket change out of selling these, you may want to print from a finer layer height, maybe even a 0.12. I still get pretty good prints from 0.2. This is an arc reactor that I'm currently finishing up, and it still looks really good, 0.2. The majority of my silk prints that I do on my Etsy store and that I sell, I usually just do them at 0.2, but I'll ask people, what are you using this for? Is it going to be up on a wall? Are you going to be wearing out? Like, what are your expectations? So if you're selling these, I recommend just kind of communicating with your client and say, hey, you know, how good do you want this to look? Because I can make it look that much better. It just might cost you a little bit more. Regardless of your layer height, you want to follow that magic number 4. If you've never heard of the magic number 4, it's been proven that when you change your layer height in increments of 4, you're going to get better quality. 0.08, 0.12, 0.16, 0.2, 0.24, 0.28. I have printed some things at 0.24 to speed up the process, and they do still look pretty good. Once you go beyond 0.24, it just starts not looking too good, especially on things like domes and anything with a curve. So I really recommend, if you're trying to do this for financial gain or just on a quality level, I would keep it at, you know, 0.2 to maybe 0.24 at the very highest. Next, moving on to temperature. Early on, before I started doing temp towers and things like that, people would say, hey, you know, crank the heat up. Silk likes 210, 215, and that's not always fully true. I was getting much better prints with lower temps. Always print temp towers. So these are 2 temp towers here, and one of them is with 0 filament. The other one is with Air One. This is a 0 filament, and they're a company that I love. Their filaments are fairly priced. They come out great. So this is a silk filament, and you can see that I'm actually getting the best results from 200 to 205. If I were to start printing in that 215 range or even that 210, I start getting some sagging, you know. And with temperatures too high, you know, you can run into that. You can run into clogs, you can run into retraction issues. So very, very important. Tons of resources out there. Cura has plugins for them for temp towers. I highly recommend, obviously, doing that before any print. You run too low of a temp, you're going to have adhesion issues. You're going to see layer lines. You run too hot, you get sagging, deformation. You could still get retraction issues. You could still get clogging issues. So you want to find that sweet spot. Definitely recommend doing temp towers. And then this is just another one that I'll show you here. This is Air One, and you can actually see from this 195 and 200 is actually way better. You see all this sagging and everything here from, you know, some of the higher temps, and it really I ended up printing this one at 200 degrees. So some of these prints I did at 210, 215, and some of them didn't even finish. They clogged, warping and everything. Just print temp towers. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to say print at 200 or 205. What I am saying is print temp towers, find out what temperature works best for you, and that's going to get you started off on the right foot. Definitely temp towers. One thing that I actually found is the build plate. My silks were getting a lot of warping and a lot of deformation when the build plate was between 60 and 62. I now lowered my build plate temperature, and I usually keep it between 55 and 57, and I no longer have that warping. I like to use brim. It gives for good adhesion, and I keep my build plate around 55, 57. You can also use raft. That'll be perfectly fine. I don't recommend a high build plate temperature. I use all Creality machines. I was getting a lot of warping, a lot of waviness on those first couple layers. They can stretch beyond what they need to. Keeping it between 55 and 57 definitely seems to be the sweet spot for silk printing. So you heard me mention it. Another thing that's just as important in temperature is retraction. Retraction is basically when the filament that is being extruded through the hot end is pulled up and retracted back into the hot end at a certain distance and a certain speed. Failure to get it calibrated properly, you can get oozing, you can get globbing, you can get blobs, you can even get clogging. So it's very important to do. I have very good luck with running a 6mm distance, and speed-wise is typically anywhere from 25 millimeters per second to 35 millimeters per second. It does like that slower speed. This was a retraction test that I did. Shout out to Teaching Tech. He has a great website on how to get these. It basically generates the G code for you, but you can see all of the tests that I did. And I kind of started, did most of them at 6 and then 5.5, and then went from 25 all the way up to 35, and they all worked out really good. So when you get a test that, you know, looks like this, where you don't have any stringing or anything, not going to guarantee that you're going to have, you know, perfect retraction at, you know, 6 millimeters at 30 millimeters per second. I'm just kind of giving you a little insight, you know, where you can start, a starting point. Cura also has a plugin in that, so definitely run that before you get printing. Get that retraction test dialed in. Not going to have any oozing, globbing, stringing, clogs, anything like that. So retraction, very important. Speed. Okay, so speed. Obviously, we want to get these prints done in a timely manner. Silk, it does not like speed. If you want those nice, smooth, crisp, clean, defined prints. You're not gonna want to be printing this at 60 millimeters per second. I always recommend doing something around 40 to 45 millimeters per second tops. And obviously in Cura, when you adjust that, it's gonna automatically adjust your walls and your initial layer speed and things like that. So set it at 40 or 45 and let Cura auto default. Lower your wall speed, you know, things like that. One big thing that I do like tuning down is jerk and my acceleration. So you have to understand that jerk and acceleration, it's basically the speed that the hot end is going to be moving back and forth. And if you have a hot end that's moving and stopping real quick and moving and stopping real quick, you know, you can get layer shifts. You could just get uneven layer lines. What's going to be better, a smooth ride or a bumpy ride? So I actually have turned, you know, my jerk all the way down to 8 millimeters per second, and my acceleration is typically around 275 millimeters per second. So when you turn that down, you're allowing the machine to move more smoothly. And also what I've found is you don't want a super fast travel speed or a super fast jerk or super fast acceleration, because if you have a lower retraction speed, it's slowly pulling that filament up. If the hot end is moving super quick, you're not giving it enough time. So I also like to lower my travel speed. I usually keep it between 90 and 100. That's a nice little tip. When I had it higher, like 115 or 120, I noticed I still got some oozing. So I don't mean to backpedal into retraction, but things like travel speed, jerk, and acceleration are all very important to tweak along with your print speed. But key point here, keep your prints a little bit slower with silk if you want that very nice, fine, defined look in your prints. All right, the last thing I'll talk about is basically infill, and infill it kind of jumbles all together here with a couple different things that I'm talking about. Infill, typically the smallest infill I will run on like a big helmet or something that has a curve or a dome is 10%. And the reason why is because you want that structure, foundation, that shell, that wall is going to lay on top of. Not enough infill, you know, you may get, again, deformation, sagging, bad adhesion, things like that. So typically I always run around 10 to 15% on really all of my helmets. If it's something small like a bust, I might bump it down to a 7 or 8, but typically 10 is really just the sweet spot. Now, one very important thing that I will talk about is your infill pattern and your infill overlap percentage. What your infill overlap is, it's basically the distance between, you know, your shell and the actual infill. If you have it too high, that will bleed through and you'll see it on the print. Now, if you add more walls or you add more top layers, it can definitely help compensate that. But just by adjusting that infill overlap percentage a little bit lower, it's going to save you time on printing. Obviously, if we don't need to put 5 or 6 top layers on, just by adjusting that infill overlap percentage, it's going to make the print finish sooner. So why don't you check out this clip here of my opinion on what infill pattern you shouldn't use and what happens when you leave your infill overlap percentage a little bit high. So I used to run infill at around 9%. I've dropped it down a little bit, but this was actually a piece here. You can see all of that pattern on there from the cubic infill. And this was 8 or 9%. This wasn't anything, you know, like 15 or how it is when it first comes out. This looks absolutely terrible. Now, this was with more walls. I had 4 or 5 walls on top of this, but what I'm getting at is I do not recommend using cubic on silk. I use lines and I have absolutely no issues. Zoom over here. He doesn't have any sort of infill lines or anything on him. He is completely crisp, nice and clean. Same thing with Scorpion over here. There's no infill patterns. There's nothing. I always use lines on that. I recommend doing a 7 to 8% infill overlap percentage and using lines. It works the best. You're not going to have any pattern. You know, if I find something that works, I stick with it. I found that lines, it works good. It still structurally gives it a, you know, a good base. It's not flimsy. It's not cracking, anything like that. So I like to keep my infill around 10%. It does save on print time. Structurally, it's still very good. You can go a little bit more. I wouldn't go crazy. I think the most I've ever printed anything in is 15%. Anything beyond that, you're just wasting time and wasting filament. So very key here, guys. Your infill pattern, and then your infill overlap percentage. Keep those around there, and I really like that lines feature. Really no trace or sign of any sort of infill lines or anything like that. So you can see there that that was when I was kind of starting off, and I just left the infill overlap percentage. I think it was at 10. I really can't remember, but I know from default it comes out higher at Cura between 10 and 15%. I bumped mine down between 7 or 8, but again, it's very, very important that if you're running a 7 or an 8 infill overlap percentage, to run a minimum of 4 top layers. And again, something usually a little bit thicker, around 0.8. You know, it's not going to make it too thick, and it's not going to make it bog up too much time or anything, but usually 0.8. If I go to 0.6, I'll add more top layers. But I have found very good luck with running my top thickness at 0.8 and running 4 to 5 top layers. Same thing with the bottom layers, around 4 to 5, and lowering that infill overlap percentage to about 7%. I have no issues with it. And actually here, check out this MF Doom one that I did with a 0.8 and a 7 infill overlap percentage. Looked absolutely great. All right, so here's a glimpse at a couple MF Doom masks I've done lately. I've been banging out a lot of these guys, but these are all done with those settings that I went over, between 10 to 12% infill. Infill overlap percentage is at 7, and then I've got, you know, adequate top layers, anywhere from 4 to 5. A couple different colors here. You can see all of them look great. This is a JO silk matte, believe it or not. Looks real cool. And then transferring over here to the gloss black silk, looks really great. All the settings, though, I use for all of them. They all turn out looking great. Don't have any complaints. My buyers really love them. Now, what does it look like when you have bad settings? Well, here we go. So these are some pumpkins, Oogie Boogie and Jack Skellington, that I did last year. And these were pumpkins that were done. And again, I talked about curved surfaces, how you may want to put a little bit more infill and more top layers. So for the most part, the pumpkin didn't look terrible, but you can see I've got extrusion issues from bad retraction. I've got separation here because I was running too low of an infill on a curved area and not enough top layers. It's very, very key, because as that dome curves, you know, that filament is stretched. And I talked about the silk filament having elastomers in them, and they do stretch. What happens is, as that nozzle goes over and puts those layers on, it can heat it up. So if you don't have enough top layers, it heats that up and stretches it more. So these were done with, God, I think like 5% infill, and I only did 3 top layers. And this is what can happen, just a mediocre print. You can see, I mean, look at the gap there. That looks terrible. You would never sell those looking like that. And to me, maybe it's a little bit OCD, but it just doesn't look good. And there were other ones I did that I threw out, but I had these laying in a drawer, so I figured I'd show you. So always make sure right thickness and right top layers to get your prints looking good, especially with silk. Guys, well, that's pretty much it. Like I said, I wanted to share what I have found works best for me in my silk printing adventures. I print a lot of these Doom masks, and these didn't always look this good. When I started doing it, you could see all kinds of terrible lines, and I had issues with retraction, and they just didn't look that good. To me, this is an absolutely fabulous looking helmet, 45 millimeters per second, all of those settings that I talked about, but it just looks awesome. You know, the cool thing with silk printing is once you get it dialed in, you really can make some nice pocket change out of it. You know, a lot of my prints that I sell on Etsy, they're all silk prints, and it's nice because I just dial it in, let the machine do the work, and then ship them off. There's no sanding, none of the headaches. Everything that you'll learn from dialing in silk printing, they can be, you know, attributed to just everyday printing. You find a certain filament, stick with it. Every filament is different. Those temp towers, those retraction tests, they are essential to getting really good quality, not just silk prints, but overall raw prints in general. Really not worth it saving $2 or $3 a roll to have to sit there and go through all these settings and then get a failed print, and then the money that you save, you end up throwing in the trash because the print failed. When you find something that works, stick with it. JO, Zero, and Air One, I love their filaments, absolutely fantastic. Let me know what filaments you guys like. Find a filament you like. When you get it dialed in, stick with it. It'll pay dividends for you. But that's pretty much it, guys. I think I'm doomed out. So I appreciate you guys watching this video. To all my subscribers, thank you so much. Hopefully you like this video. Hopefully it helps you maybe understand a little bit more about settings in Cura. I will have some future videos showing you how to use those temp towers, retraction tests, things like that. But they are very key, very essential to getting quality prints. So make sure you look into those. And obviously, if you have any questions on anything, feel free to drop me a comment. You know I'll always reply. If you're not a subscriber to the channel and you like Doom or 3D printing or anything like that, make sure to click the subscribe button. Like I said, I have so many more videos on deck. So much to do, so little time, but I do have a lot more great stuff coming along the way, so make sure you click that subscribe button and join the DW family. If you like this video or found it helpful, please give me a thumbs up. Like I said, drop me a comment. Let me know what you think. That's it, guys. I am done. That's it. Drop me a line, drop me a comment, give me a thumbs up. Let me know what you think of the video. And until next time, Doom and DW out. Later.